I'm a 26-year-old guy, and until recently I was living at home while saving up for my own place. Rent prices are ridiculous, and since my parents never had an issue with me staying, it seemed like a win-win. I paid my share of the bills, helped around the house, and figured I had a little more time before I needed to move out. Then, out of nowhere, my parents and younger sister 22 Fef sat me down in the living room with these huge smiles on their faces. My mom looked especially excited, clapping her hands together like she couldn't wait to spill the news. They had planned a surprise vacation for me, a week-long fully paid-for trip to a resort. Flights, hotel, everything covered. It was weird. My parents weren't the surprise gift type. Birthdays were usually just a dinner, and if I ever wanted to travel, I paid for it myself. They never did anything like this. So yeah, something felt off. I even asked why they would do this out of the blue. But my mom just laughed and said, "Because you deserve it. You've been working so hard." My dad nodded along, and my sister smiled, but something about her seemed uneasy. I was skeptical, but there weren't any red flags. My room was untouched. My belongings were still there, and nothing suggested that I was being pushed out. If this was a trick, they were playing the long game. Then they handed me the travel details, real flights, real hotel reservation, a full itinerary of things to do at the resort. It looked legit. My name was on everything. They even showed me the confirmation emails. I was starting to feel like an idiot for being suspicious. Maybe they really were just being nice. Maybe they felt bad that I'd been stuck at home saving money, while most people my age had already moved out. I let myself believe it. The weirdness didn't stop there though. My mom was suddenly rushing everything. She wanted me packed and ready to go immediately. I had a few days before the flight, but she kept saying things like, "Why wait? You should get there early and enjoy yourself." She even suggested I just throw some clothes in a bag and buy whatever I needed at the resort. It didn't make sense. Who rushes a vacation they paid for? I told her I wanted to pack properly, but she brushed it off. My dad offered to drive me to the airport that night, so I wouldn't have to worry about traffic in the morning. That's when my sister started acting really weird. She barely said anything and kept avoiding eye contact. When I told her I'd text her when I landed, she just nodded but wouldn't really look at me. By the time I got to the airport, something wasn't sitting right with me. It just felt off. But there I was, standing in the terminal with a suitcase, a real ticket in my hand, and a fancy resort waiting for me. Maybe I was overthinking it. Before boarding, I texted my best friend as a joke. "If this is a setup and I come back to find all my stuff gone, I'm crashing at your place." I landed at the resort, and for a while everything seemed fine. The hotel was real, the check-in was smooth, and my room was nice. Expensive, even. My parents had spent a lot on this. But then I realized something strange, no check-ins from them. Normally my mom would be all over this. "Did you land safely? Is the hotel nice?" Instead, nothing. Just a single text hours later, "Hope you're having fun." I texted back, asking how things were, but the responses were slow, short, weirdly vague. Then came the bank notification. A moving truck rental in my hometown. Paid for using the emergency fund I had trusted them with. A fund I had built while saving up to move out. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. But when I called my bank, they confirmed it. Someone used my card to book a moving truck. My stomach dropped. I called my parents. No answer. Called again. Nothing. Then my sister picked up. The second she heard my voice, she started crying. That's when I knew. I asked her what was going on, and between sobs, she let it slip. "They're moving your stuff out of the house." I could barely process it. They had planned this, the whole trip. The fake generosity. It wasn't a gift, it was a distraction. They waited until I was out of town, then rented a truck, and started clearing out my room. I hung up and immediately booked the next flight home. The second my sister slipped up and admitted what was happening, I ended the call and booked the soonest flight home. The resort, the vacation, none of it mattered anymore. I wasn't even thinking about what I'd find when I got back, just that I needed to get there as fast as possible. My phone was blowing up with transaction alerts. My parents had emptied my room, but instead of paying for the moving truck themselves, they used my old shared account, the one I had helped them with before, to book it. They didn't steal from me outright, but they sure weren't planning on paying me back. I tried calling my parents. No answer. Tried again, straight to voicemail. My sister had gone silent. No replies to texts. I checked my email for my flight confirmation and saw something else. An auto payment transfer. My checking account was $2,000 lighter. I landed in the early hours of the morning, exhausted but running on pure adrenaline. I didn't go home right away. I went to my bank first, had to get my card frozen, had to figure out where that money went. The teller confirmed it was a direct transfer to my parents' account. They took it like it was theirs, like I owed them. I barely made it through that conversation before leaving. I took a rideshare straight to the house I had lived in my whole life, I didn't even recognize it. My key didn't fit. They changed the locks. The porch light was off. And in the driveway, a pile of my stuff. Clothes, boxes, random furniture, dumped like trash. The moving truck was gone. My car was still parked on the street, untouched, but everything else was out. I knocked, no answer. Knocked again. I could hear movement inside, footsteps, voices, but no one came to the door. Then my mom's voice, muffled through the door. You should have seen this coming. That was it. No explanation. No apology. My sister came outside a few minutes later, eyes red, barely able to look at me. She wasn't part of this. Not really. But she had known. She had watched it happen. She kept whispering how sorry she was. How they had pressured her. How she couldn't stop them. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my dad. It was time for you to move on. That was all he sent. No emotion, no reason. Just a simple cold message. I turned back to my things. Boxes were half open, some barely taped shut. My gaming PC, scratched, side panel missing. My TV had a crack down the middle. Clothes were spilling out of a ripped suitcase. It was obvious they hadn't cared about keeping my things intact. I stood there for a while, just taking it in, then started making calls. My best friend answered on the first ring. Yeah, dude, get over here. You can crash at my place. I packed what I could into my car, left behind what I couldn't fit. It wasn't like I had much of a choice. At my friend's place, I finally got more answers. My sister called me, still crying. She told me our parents had already been spreading lies to the rest of the family. They told everyone I moved out willingly, that they helped me transition into adulthood. That wasn't even the worst part. They told my extended family that the $2,000 was back rent that I had owed them for months, that I had agreed to let them take it. None of it was true. I had given them that money a year ago to help with bills, never once asked for it back. But they twisted the story, made it seem like I had been mooching off them, like they had done me some grand favor by throwing me out. I needed legal advice. Fast. One of my friends put me in touch with a lawyer. First thing he told me, if you were living there long-term and paying bills, they couldn't just kick you out without notice. Family or not, they had no right to do this. No eviction notice, no warning. Just a fake vacation, a moving truck, and a locked door. My sister confirmed more details. They planned it all out weeks in advance. Booked the moving truck before I even left. Went through my room while I was in the air, deciding what to toss and what to keep. They didn't just want me out, they wanted to erase me from the house. I started reaching out to relatives. My aunt, my uncles. No one had heard the real story. The second I told them, the group chats exploded. Calls started coming in. My mom wasn't answering them. Then she finally texted me. A long, manipulative rant. We had to do this. You weren't moving fast enough. We did what was best for you. You'll thank us one day. I didn't respond. I took screenshots instead. Then I posted everything online. The full story. The texts. The bank charges. The photos of my stuff dumped outside. People were furious. Friends, distant family members. Even random internet strangers. That's when my parents blocked me. Just like that. No defense, no arguments. I wasn't their problem anymore. I expected silence. Instead, my mom started damage control. She called up my aunts and uncles first, trying to twist the story before I could. Then she made a vague Facebook post about how sometimes parents have to make hard choices for their kids. No names were mentioned, but it was obvious. She went on about how parents sacrifice everything, and how sometimes tough love is the only way to teach a lesson. Then came the best part. She claimed she had given me an opportunity to finally become independent, but I had chosen to make a spectacle of it. The comment section was a mess. At first, it was just her usual friends agreeing with her, but then extended family and even people from our hometown started chiming in. Some had already seen my post. Others were confused and started asking questions. She deleted those comments quickly. Then my dad made things worse. He responded under her post with some nonsense about how a real man wouldn't be so upset about moving out. He even threw in some fake wisdom about how life is about standing on your own 2 feet and how they gave me the push I needed. My aunt wasn't having it. She had already been furious after I told her the truth, but that post sent her over the edge. She went straight to my parents' house and confronted them in person. Neighbors saw it. There was yelling. A lot of yelling. My sister had tried to warn me, in her own way. The night before I left, she hugged me tighter than usual and said, "Just be careful, okay?" I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now I knew she had wanted to say more. My dad just kept doubling down, refusing to admit they had done anything wrong. Then, in the middle of all that, my grandmother found out. Grandma had always been the one person my parents still tried to impress. She wasn't rich, but she had helped them financially more than once. She had also helped raise me and my sister when we were younger. When she heard the full story from my aunt, she lost it. She called them heartless and told them she was ashamed of them. Then she called me and asked if I needed help getting back on my feet. Meanwhile, things at work took an unexpected turn. I had kept everything professional, not bringing my personal issues into the office. But after my post went viral, some coworkers found out. Next thing I knew, they started pooling money together to help me cover rent for a new place. Even my manager got involved. They gave me extra hours and connected me with temporary lodging assistance through work. That was when my dad decided to text me again. He told me if I didn't drop this nonsense, they would cut me off completely. I laughed. Cut me off from what? They had already taken my money, stolen my things, and kicked me out. There was nothing left for them to hold over me. I told him exactly that. Then my sister gave me more bad news. Some of my stuff was missing, not just damaged, gone. I had assumed they were careless with my belongings, but she told me they had actually taken some of it. My old coin collection, some expensive sneakers, a few electronics, all disappeared during the move. My parents had stolen from me on top of everything else. I started putting together everything: texts, transaction records, bank statements, screenshots of my mom's post. A lawyer friend told me I might have a case, even if it wasn't a huge one. At the very least, I could take them to small claims court over the stolen money and damaged property. As I was sorting through all this, I realized something: my friends were showing up for me in ways my own family never had. My best friend had given me a place to stay without hesitation. My coworkers had gone out of their way to help. Even my aunt and grandma were standing up for me. My parents, they were out there playing the victims. Then the hometown gossip started spreading. People from my old school, old neighbors, even some of my parents' old friends started talking. Some of them knew about my post. Others had heard about my aunt's shouting match with my mom. My parents had always kept up the appearance of stability, attending community events, making donations, and maintaining ties with local business owners. But behind closed doors, they were barely scraping by. Now that their secrets were out, they had nothing left to hide behind. That's when my mom tried guilt-tripping me. She sent me a long message about how she was crying herself to sleep because I was turning the family against them. How could I do this to them? Didn't I understand they only wanted what was best for me? I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on moving forward. With the help of my coworkers' fundraiser and some emergency savings, I found an affordable apartment. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I signed the lease, moved in, and for the first time in my life, I had a space that was completely my own. Then, I made it official. I sent my parents one final message. I told them I was done. No more contact. No more pretending to be a family. For the first time since this all started, they didn't argue. They just went silent. The call from my aunt came out of nowhere. I picked up, and the first thing I heard was her yelling, not at me but about my parents. She had just come back from confronting them in person. Apparently, after everything blew up, she had demanded answers, and what she got was a mess of half-truths and excuses. According to my parents, I had chosen to move out abruptly, and they were just helping me transition. They told everyone I had agreed to the vacation plan and had overreacted when I came home to find my stuff outside. None of it added up. I sent my aunt screenshots, texts from my mom admitting they tricked me into a fake vacation, the moving truck rental on my card, my dad's cold message telling me it was time to move on. Silence for a few minutes. Then, a simple reply: "This is worse than I thought." That's when my grandmother found out. I don't know what my parents were thinking, but they had clearly forgotten that grandma doesn't take sides. She takes justice. When my aunt told her the real story, it set her off. She called my mom and ripped into her, furious that they had pulled something like this on their own son. Then came the real damage. Grandma threatened to cut them out of her will. This was a big deal. My parents weren't exactly struggling, but they weren't rich either. Grandma's inheritance would have been a safety net, and losing it wasn't something they could afford. That's when my mom's attitude changed. After weeks of blocking me, ignoring my calls and playing the victim online, she suddenly unblocked me. Then the calls started, one after another. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I didn't answer. Then my dad sent a text. The same guy who told me I was weak for making a big deal out of this suddenly had a very different tone. "We need to talk. As a family." I ignored that too. My sister was still caught in the middle. My parents were guilt-tripping her constantly, accusing her of betraying the family for staying in contact with me. She was torn, but then she admitted something that changed everything. Before I left for that fake vacation, she had secretly recorded parts of their plan. She sent me a short clip. It was my mom's voice laughing. "He won't know what hit him when he gets back." That was it, proof. The final piece. I posted another update online, this time with the recording attached. It spread fast. The reaction was immediate. The last few people defending my parents went quiet. Old neighbors reached out, saying my parents had pulled similar stunts before. One even told me they had done something shady to my older cousin when he lived with them years ago. Then my parents' landlord found out. I had assumed they owned the house. They didn't. They had been renting for years, and their landlord was not happy when he heard about what happened. I didn't know the full details, but my aunt later told me he was suddenly reconsidering their lease renewal. That's when my mom tried one last desperate move. A long rambling text about family loyalty, how I was ruining them, how I should think about what I was doing before it was too late. I didn't reply. Instead, I talked to my lawyer friend. Legally, I had a case. If they threw out or damaged my stuff, I could take them to small claims court. I started gathering receipts. Then the fallout really hit them. My parents' friends, people they had known for years, started distancing themselves. My dad's coworkers apparently heard about it too. Someone at his job brought it up, and from what I heard, he was humiliated. Then one last voicemail from my dad. No more arrogance. No more lecturing. Just a nervous, quiet message. We need to fix this. You're making things worse. I didn't respond. I thought the silence meant they had given up. I was wrong. A few days after my dad's nervous voicemail, my parents showed up at my apartment. No warning, no texts, just pounding on my door in the middle of the afternoon. I looked through the peephole. Both of them were standing there. My mom had that overly dramatic fake hurt expression she always used when trying to manipulate someone. My dad had his arms crossed, stiff, like he was trying to look in control. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stood there waiting, letting them knock again and again. After a minute, my mom spoke loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. We just want to talk. You don't have to be so hostile. I cracked the door open, but left the chain on. Told them they weren't coming in. That's when my mom turned on the waterworks. We were just trying to help you grow up. You needed a push. We never meant for it to turn out like this. She let out a shaky sigh, voice trembling like she was on the verge of tears. This isn't how family treats each other. It might have worked if I hadn't seen her switch back to anger so quickly before. I laughed. Not out of humor, but because of how predictable it was. Then my dad stepped forward. The fake sympathy act was over in seconds. His voice was sharp. You need to delete everything you posted online. This has gone too far. I shut the door, but he stuck his foot in before it closed. We've spoken to a lawyer, he said. Like that was supposed to scare me. You're slandering us. If you don't take everything down, we'll take legal action. It was such an obvious bluff. If they actually had a lawyer, they wouldn't be handling things like this. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer friend on speaker, right in front of them. As soon as my friend picked up, my dad's confidence dropped. My friend didn't even let him finish. He just laughed loudly. Tell them to leave before they embarrass themselves more. My dad clenched his jaw, but he didn't have a response. Then my mom lost it. The fake crying turned into real screaming. You're tearing this family apart. She kept repeating it, getting louder, hands waving like a bad soap opera actress. Neighbors started poking their heads out of their doors. My best friend, who was visiting, stepped outside to watch. I pulled out my phone and started recording. My dad took a step forward, voice low. You've embarrassed us enough. Take it all down. He didn't yell, he didn't shove. But the tension in his voice was enough to make my best friend step between us. Before I could react, my best friend stepped between us, shoving him back. My dad stumbled, but before anything else could happen, a voice from the side called out. Hey, I'm calling the cops. A neighbor. I didn't even see which one. That changed everything. The moment my mom heard the word cops, she started sobbing again. My dad backed up, straightening his shirt like nothing had happened. They stood there awkwardly for maybe 30 seconds. Then the sirens came. 2 officers showed up. One took me aside while the other spoke to my parents. My dad immediately flipped into victim mode. I just came here to talk to my son, and he attacked me. The officer next to me asked if I had any proof. I played the video. It showed everything. My dad trying to grab my phone, him pushing me, my best friend stepping in. Then it showed my mom screaming about how I was tearing apart the family. The cops sighed, clearly annoyed to be dealing with a family dispute. Look, I'm not filing a report over this. Just keep your distance, all right? He turned to my dad. If you show up again, it could be trespassing. That shut my parents up. They left quickly, trying to save face, but the damage was done. The next day, my aunt called. She was livid. She had already been mad about everything before, but when she heard my parents actually got physical, that was it. She called them herself and tore into them. From what I heard, the fight was bad enough that even more relatives got involved. Then the final blow, more of their friends started cutting ties. Apparently, some of them had seen my video before my parents tried to downplay everything. The recording of my mom laughing about how he won't know what hit him had already spread. This was just the nail in the coffin. Their reputation, done, for the first time in their lives, they were completely outcast. No more respect, no more sympathy, just the consequences of their own choices. The downfall was inevitable. It started with their landlord. I had assumed my parents owned their home, but they had actually been renting for years. Turns out their landlord wasn't a fan of drama. After hearing about the police showing up, the online mess, and the family fights, he decided he'd had enough. The notice came quickly. Their lease wasn't being renewed. They had 60 days to vacate. The moment my mom found out, the calls started again. This time, they weren't about deleting my posts, they were about blaming me. She sobbed into the phone, talking about how I had destroyed their lives and made them homeless. She kept repeating that she had nowhere to go, and that I had ruined everything. I didn't respond. Then my dad broke his silence. A simple text, "You got what you wanted. Hope you're happy." I blocked his number. Meanwhile, my sister finally had enough. After months of guilt tripping and pressure, she packed up and left. She had been staying there out of obligation, but with everything crumbling, she saw the perfect opportunity to escape. She crashed at a friend's place and cut them off. With their support system gone, my parents were completely alone. Their reputation, beyond repair. It wasn't just extended family turning against them anymore, it was everyone. Their friends stopped inviting them to things. Their usual social circles ghosted them. People avoided them in public. Over the next few months, things got worse for my dad at work. The respect he once had was slipping. Coworkers whispered behind his back. Managers scrutinized his performance more. One mistake, and it was over. The same coworkers who used to respect him were now whispering behind his back. He was being treated differently, like an outsider. His boss, who had always been a family man, apparently didn't take kindly to the way he had treated his own son. He wasn't fired, but he was suddenly on thin ice. Then came my mom's final guilt trip. A message, long and dramatic. "We'll be homeless, all because of you." I responded with 6 words. "That's on you, not me." No more arguing. No more justifying. Just the truth. Then my aunt reached out. She reassured me that I did the right thing. She even offered to help with legal fees if I decided to take my parents to court over the stolen money and missing belongings. But honestly, I was done. I didn't need revenge. I had already won, and life was moving forward. Despite everything, work had been going well. My manager noticed my dedication, and after a few months of hard work, I got promoted. I moved into a better apartment. For the first time in years, I had my own space. No tension, no manipulation, no feeling like I was walking on eggshells. Then, the last message, from my dad's number. "We don't have a son anymore." I didn't reply. I just blocked him. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just the end of our relationship. This was the end of their control. They had lost everything. And I was finally free. A month had passed since I cut my parents off for good. No messages, no calls, nothing. It was finally quiet. Then, out of nowhere, my mom texted me. "Your dad is in the hospital. He had a heart attack." I stared at the message. It was too sudden, too convenient. With everything they had done, the fake generosity, the guilt tripping, the public manipulation, it just didn't feel real. If my dad had actually been hospitalized, my sister or my aunt would have told me. Instead of panicking, I called my aunt. She checked. No hospital records. No emergency admissions for my dad. Nothing. I texted my mom back. "Which hospital?" She took a while to respond. When she finally did, she ignored the question entirely. Instead, she launched into how this was my fault. How my dad was stressed to the point of collapse because of everything I had put him through. She was lying. I sent one last text. "I already checked. He's not in any hospital." Then I blocked her again. But the damage was already done, just not to me. My aunt, furious at their manipulation, took things a step further. She made a Facebook post exposing the lie, making it crystal clear that my parents had faked a heart attack just to guilt me into talking to them. It spread fast. Every relative who had still been giving my parents the benefit of the doubt dropped them immediately. Nobody wanted to be associated with that level of desperation. That's when my mom cracked. She finally admitted to my sister that she made up the heart attack. Her excuse: "I was just trying to get him to talk." That was the last straw for my sister. She cut them off completely, changed her number, deleted them from social media. Now my parents were truly alone. Then my dad made one last attempt. A single email. "Let's meet." Just once. No long speech. No fake guilt. Just a simple, seemingly reasonable request. I didn't fall for it. I replied with one thing, a screenshot of my mom's fake hospital message: "We're done." I didn't wait for a response. I blocked his email. Then came my mom's public meltdown. She went back to Facebook, making a long rambling post about how children today are ungrateful, how cancel culture ruined our family, and how parents sacrifice everything just to be abandoned. It backfired. The comment section was brutal. Instead of sympathy, people called her out hard. Even old friends turned against her, some outright saying they had lost respect for her. Others mentioned how she had been dishonest in the past. Whatever little social standing my parents had left, it was gone. No friends, no family, no support. They were truly alone. It started with my dad's job. For months he had been walking on thin ice. The drama had followed him to work, and while he wasn't outright fired at first, things had changed. His boss had started cutting his hours. The respect he once had in the office was gone. His coworkers weren't talking to him the same way anymore. The whispering never stopped. Then one day it was over. My dad had already been on thin ice after missing deadlines and snapping at coworkers. When the rumors about our family mess surfaced, it just gave his boss the final push to let him go. My mom wasn't doing any better. With their eviction deadline creeping up, she had started applying for jobs again. She wasn't having any luck. It wasn't just her age working against her, it was her reputation. Employers did their research, and somehow word had spread about what she had done to me. Application after application, rejection after rejection, then came the eviction. Their 60 days ran out, and just like they had done to me, they found themselves with nowhere to go. The house they had lived in for years, gone. That's when the messages started again. Not to me this time, to my sister. Mom was begging, desperate. She claimed they had no money for a new place, and nowhere to go. She needed just a little help to get back on their feet. My sister didn't fall for it. After everything, she told them the same thing I did. This was their mess to fix. That's when my aunt got involved. She had been watching the entire situation unfold from the sidelines, but now, my parents were trying to get her to take them in. They weren't asking, they were demanding. She shut them down immediately. She told them straight to their faces, "You did this to yourselves." With no one willing to help, they started selling their things. Furniture, electronics, even my dad's old watch collection, gone. Pawn shops became their only option. But it wasn't enough. Their local reputation was ruined. The town wasn't that big, and everyone had heard the story by now. The landlords knew. Every time they applied for a rental, they got rejected. No one wanted to deal with them. Then they tried moving in with family. At first, some family members still defended them. "It's just a misunderstanding," one uncle said, but after weeks of hearing the full story and seeing the proof, I could tell they were backing away. One by one, the sympathy dried up. They had burned too many bridges. That's when my mom finally snapped. She sent one last message, not to ask for help this time, but to blame me for everything. According to her, I had ruined their lives. She hoped I would regret it one day. I didn't even read it fully. I blocked her. For good. A week later, my aunt told me they had finally found a place to live. A run-down tiny apartment, a massive downgrade from what they used to have. My dad stopped talking to most people after that. The man who once prided himself on being respected was now avoiding everyone, depressed, bitter. My mom? She still blamed everyone but herself. She was still ranting online, but no one was listening anymore. No friends, no reputation, no power. They had lost everything. Life after cutting them off felt like stepping into a completely new world. I had a stable job, a new apartment, and people in my life who actually cared about me. No more manipulation, no more guilt tripping, no more second-guessing every conversation, just peace. My sister and I became closer than we had ever been. Without our parents constantly trying to control and divide us, we could actually talk. We started meeting up regularly, catching up on life. She finally felt free too, free to live her own life without their influence. Then something happened that I hadn't even realized I had been avoiding for years. I started dating again. For so long, my head had been filled with nothing but my family's drama. It had taken up so much space in my life that I hadn't even considered opening up to someone new. But now, I felt lighter, free, ready to move forward. Meanwhile, my mom's Facebook page had become a wasteland. She used to post constantly, always trying to control the narrative, always spinning stories to make herself look good. Now, it was just a handful of ignored rants, posts about betrayal and ungrateful children, but no one was engaging anymore. Even the friends who once defended her were gone. My aunt later told me that my dad was barely speaking these days. He had lost his job, his reputation, and the respect he had spent his whole life clinging to. The man who once prided himself on being well-liked was now just a shell of who he used to be. Then, one last attempt. A message from an unknown number. "We miss you." No name, no details. But I knew exactly who it was from. I didn't reply. I didn't even hesitate before blocking the number. A few weeks later, I heard from my aunt that their old friends had completely moved on. Whatever hope they had of rebuilding their reputation was gone. No one wanted to be associated with them anymore. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago. I started therapy. Not because I was struggling, but because I wanted to fully close this chapter of my life. I wanted to process everything, let go of the past, and make sure I never carried any of that toxicity into my future. It helped. A lot. My sister took things even further. She changed her number, deleted any traces of them from her life, and made it clear she was going no contact forever. It was over. Their attempt to ruin my life, it only made me stronger. Weeks passed. Then months. No more messages. No more calls. No more drama. They had finally given up. For the first time, I felt completely free. No guilt, no attachment, just a clean break. Their reputation, permanently ruined. They could never recover from what they did. And me? I had zero regrets. Looking back, cutting them off was the best decision I ever made. They were just a distant memory now. I moved on, completely free. I'm 34, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one holding my family together. Every argument, every holiday meltdown, every passive-aggressive jab that spiraled into a full-blown fight, I was always the one stepping in to smooth things over. I didn't ask for the job, but somehow it became my responsibility. My family is the kind of big, chaotic mess that people joke about at work, but secretly thank their lucky stars they don't have to deal with. There's my mom, who thrives on guilt tripping. My dad, who stays out of everything until it directly affects him. My brother Daniel, my sister, and a collection of aunts, uncles, and cousins who turn every gathering into a reality TV special. They don't just fight, they love to fight. Old grudges are dusted off like fine china at family reunions, and someone is always storming out of a room dramatically. And me, I was the idiot always trying to keep things from falling apart. I canceled plans to answer late-night calls about ridiculous disputes. I paid off debts when family members couldn't pay rent and covered last-minute wedding expenses because family sticks together. I played therapist, mediator, and financial advisor, all for the low, low price of zero appreciation. Last Thanksgiving was the perfect example. My aunt and my sister got into it over something that happened years ago, something about a bridesmaid dress, and a comment that was apparently never forgotten. One passive-aggressive comment turned into outright yelling. My mom was near tears, my dad was conveniently not hearing anything, and my brother was shoveling mashed potatoes into his mouth like his life depended on it. I spent the night talking my sister down, calming my aunt, and convincing everyone that we didn't need another ruined holiday. It worked. By the end of the night, people were laughing again, and for the millionth time I thought, at least I stopped it from getting worse. But the thing is, no one ever thanked me. No one ever acknowledged how much effort it took. The next day, it was like nothing had happened, like I hadn't been the one holding the entire evening together. Then came Daniel's engagement, and with it, a whole new level of stress. Daniel and his fiancée, Lisa, started planning their wedding, and like clockwork, the family turned it into a battleground. My mom and Lisa's mom didn't get along. My sister had opinions about the bridesmaid dresses, and my aunts had a lot to say about the guest list. I should have known I'd be dragged into it when Daniel invited me to his bachelor party. That wasn't surprising. What was surprising was what he said when he invited me. We need you there to keep things from getting out of hand. Not we want you there because you're my brother. Not it wouldn't be the same without you. Just a direct admission that my presence wasn't about me. It was about making sure they didn't self-destruct. That was the first crack. Then, a couple of days later, at a family dinner, one of my cousins made a joke that stuck with me. You always take this stuff so seriously. We have to keep it entertaining somehow. I laughed it off at the time, but it wasn't the first time I had heard something like that. A few months back, an uncle had chuckled, "You always take the bait, don't you?" When I tried to de-escalate an argument. I had brushed it off then, but now I was starting to wonder if they saw my efforts as more of a game than genuine help. I mentioned it to my best friend, someone who's never been directly involved in my family's chaos, but has heard enough about it over the years. His response was blunt. "Dude, I think they see you as a joke." That hit harder than I expected. The next weekend, I was at my cousin's place, and he left his phone on the table while he went to grab drinks. I wasn't planning to snoop, but a notification popped up that caught my attention. A message from a group chat named Fix It Felix Chronicles. I had no idea what it was, but I knew one thing. Felix was what my family jokingly called me whenever I fixed their nonsense. I scrolled through the chat, and at first, it seemed harmless. Jokes, memes, light teasing. But the deeper I went, the worse it got. They weren't just joking about me, they were planning around me, coordinating how to push my buttons, betting on how quickly I'd intervene. I had thought I was their problem solver, but to them, I was just entertainment. Bets on how long I'd last before I gave one of my serious speeches. Messages where they deliberately planned to push certain topics because they knew I'd intervene. I sat there reading, feeling like the biggest fool on the planet. For years, I thought I was keeping the family together. That all the stress, the lost time, the sacrificed plans, it was all worth it because I was preventing things from getting worse. But in reality, they wanted the drama. They wanted me to scramble. I was their entertainment. I left without saying a word. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept replaying all the times I had stepped in. thinking I was doing something good. I had convinced myself that if I didn't, everything would spiral out of control. But what if that was never true? What if I had been fueling the problem by constantly fixing things? By the morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to say anything. I wasn't going to confront anyone. I wasn't going to make a big speech about how they had betrayed me. I was just going to stop. No more fixing. No more late-night calls. No more running interference at family events. Let them deal with their own mess for once. Let them see what happens when the one person keeping the peace walks away. The real test would be at Daniel's bachelor party. If they wanted chaos, they were about to get it. Daniel's bachelor party was the perfect test. Normally, these kinds of events were minefields. Mix alcohol, big personalities, and unresolved family drama, and it was only a matter of time before something went wrong. But this time, I wasn't going to step in. No more fixing. No more smoothing things over. We met at a bar downtown, a high-end place with overpriced cocktails and dim lighting. Daniel was in good spirits, surrounded by friends and family. His two best friends, Aaron and Jason, had always been at odds, but Daniel insisted they were both important to him, so they had to be there. The night started out fine. Drinks were poured, toasts were made, and for a moment it almost felt normal. But it didn't take long for the first crack to appear. Aaron and Jason started arguing over the bar tab. It started as a joke, something about who owed what from a previous night out, but the tone shifted fast. Voices got louder, and soon enough, it was less about money and more about old grudges. This was usually my cue. I would have stepped in, calmed them down, redirected the conversation. Instead, I just watched. The argument escalated. Jason slammed his drink down, swearing under his breath. Aaron shot back with something about Jason never pulling his weight. Other guests started looking over. The bartender frowned, already deciding whether he needed to intervene. Then Jason stood up so fast his chair nearly toppled over. He grabbed his jacket, threw down a bill, and stormed out. Daniel turned to me immediately, expecting me to do something. Fix things, go after Jason, calm Aaron down, smooth it over so the night wouldn't be ruined. I just shrugged. Daniel blinked like he hadn't heard me right. He started to say something, but I turned back to my drink. The moment stretched, and then he had to deal with the mess himself. Without me, things unraveled quickly. A cousin, who had been drinking too much, decided this was the perfect time to bring up wedding costs. Loudly, he cornered Daniel, demanding to know why some family members were covering their own hotel stays while others weren't. Someone else chimed in, complaining about the open bar limitations. Tension spread like wildfire. Another cousin nearly got kicked out for arguing with a bartender over a drink order. Daniel tried to manage things, but he wasn't used to this. Normally, I would be there, absorbing the stress, diffusing fights before they got out of hand. Without me stepping in, it was chaos. By the end of the night, Daniel looked exhausted. He kept glancing at me, like he was waiting for me to say something to step in at the last minute and undo the damage. I didn't. Later, when most of the group had dispersed, Daniel pulled me aside. He was frustrated, confused, wanted to know why I was acting different. I told him, "You guys seemed to enjoy the drama, figured you didn't need my interference." His face went stiff. He tried to act like he didn't know what I meant, but the guilt was obvious. I didn't give him a chance to argue, just walked away. The next morning, the wedding group chat was on fire. People were blaming each other for the night's disasters. Some were furious that Jason had left early. Others were mad about the argument over money. One of my aunts even chimed in, demanding to know why there was so much tension when this was supposed to be a joyous occasion. For the first time in my life, my name came up, not as the guy fixing things, but as the guy who didn't. My mom called. She had a way of making a simple hello sound like a lecture. Wanted to know why I wasn't helping Daniel smooth things over. Wanted to know what was wrong with me. I played dumb. She tried guilt-tripping me. I let her talk. When she realized I wasn't budging, she got frustrated and ended the call. Meanwhile, my sister, who decided to take on the peacemaker role in my absence, was struggling. She tried to calm people down in the group chat, but it only made things worse. Instead of de-escalating, she ended up getting dragged into the fights herself. Daniel, who was usually the carefree one, was feeling the pressure. He was starting to realize that without me keeping things together, his wedding was shaping up to be a disaster, and the wedding weekend hadn't even started yet. I sat back, sipped my coffee, and enjoyed the show, because this was just the beginning. By the time the wedding weekend arrived, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The family was already divided. The fallout from the bachelor party had turned small rifts into full-blown feuds. Some relatives weren't even speaking to each other, and the wedding group chat had gone from passive-aggressive to outright hostile. When I walked into the venue, I saw it immediately. Daniel, usually the loudest, most easygoing guy in the room, looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his jaw clenched tight. His fiancée, Lisa, was doing most of the smiling, but even she looked like she was barely holding it together. Daniel was used to things magically working out. He was used to people making his life easier. But this time he was feeling every bit of the stress. The ceremony itself was fine, mostly because everyone had to sit down and behave for an hour. But the moment we stepped into the reception hall, the cracks started to show. It started with two of my uncles. Both had been drinking since the afternoon, and had a long, complicated history over some loan that had never been paid back. Normally, they'd shoot a few bitter remarks at each other, I'd step in, crack a joke, and steer the conversation somewhere else. This time, no one stopped them. What started as a few pointed comments turned into a heated argument. Voices got louder. People nearby started inching away. Then my sister tried to step in. She had taken it upon herself to keep the peace in my absence. But she didn't have the finesse for it. She ended up taking sides without realizing it, which only made things worse. One uncle accused her of butting in where she didn't belong. The other took it as proof that everyone was against him. Meanwhile, Daniel was putting out fires of his own. His mother-in-law had gotten wind of all the pre-wedding drama and was now deeply concerned about what kind of family her daughter was marrying into. Lisa pulled Daniel aside multiple times, her voice low and urgent. From across the room, I could see the way she kept glancing at his relatives like she was reconsidering her choices. Then came the final explosion. One of my drunk cousins, already on edge from all the tension, decided this was the perfect moment to bring up an old grudge about a childhood fight. Something stupid, something meaningless, but after enough alcohol, it felt important to him. The person he was arguing with shoved him. He shoved back. A chair scraped against the floor. Then, glass shattering. The table behind them went down, champagne flutes crashing, people gasping. The entire room went silent, and just like that, all eyes were on me. It was instinct for them at this point. Every single time things got out of control, they looked to me to fix it. To step in, break up the fight, calm everyone down, smooth things over so they could go back to pretending everything was fine. Instead, I picked up my drink, took a slow sip, and raised an eyebrow. Not my problem. A ripple went through the room. My mother's face went pale. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. Daniel's expression shifted from shock to anger, like he couldn't believe what he had just heard. The realization hit all of them at once. I was done. My mother pulled me aside, dragging me toward the back of the room. Her voice was low and frantic, demanding to know what was wrong with me, why I was acting like this, why I wasn't helping. I shrugged. You never appreciated what I did anyway. Daniel stormed over next. His face red, he was furious. You let this happen on purpose, he snapped. I smirked. Oh, so my presence did matter. His mouth opened, then closed. Silence. And then I dropped the final bombshell. I know about the group chat. The blood drained from his face. He didn't even try to deny it. He knew exactly what I was talking about. The Fix-It Felix Chronicles. The memes. The jokes at my expense. The bets on how long it would take me to step in and fix things. Lisa overheard. She turned to Daniel, eyebrows raised, waiting for an explanation. He had none. I let the silence hang between us for a few seconds, then turned around and walked out of the wedding. My phone buzzed before I even reached my car. Missed calls, angry messages, a few half-hearted apologies. My sister sent a long paragraph about how she never realized how much I actually did. A cousin tried to make excuses. Daniel, nothing. I turned off my phone, slept better that night than I had in years. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, unread messages. Notifications stacked up so high it looked like an emergency alert system had gone off. I didn't even need to check to know what was happening. Still, curiosity got the best of me. The wedding group chat was on fire. Messages flooded in from every direction. Some relatives were demanding apologies. Others were still arguing about the disaster from the night before. The blame was flying around like a tornado. An aunt was furious at Daniel for not keeping his guests under control. Someone else was ranting about how my sister had failed at mediating. Another uncle was asking why I had acted like a spectator instead of helping. The real chaos, though, was in the side conversations. I scrolled through unread texts. My mom had sent the most paragraphs of messages, her tone shifting between outrage and guilt-tripping. I let them sit. The next call came exactly when I expected it. Her voice shook with anger. You ruined your brother's wedding. I let the words hang in the air before replying. Calm as ever. No, I just didn't fix it. That shut her up for a second. Then the ranting started again. How I let it happen. How I could have done something. How I should have done something. I put the phone on speaker, let her get it out of her system, and stared at my coffee while she talked herself in circles. She waited for my usual response. The soothing words, the apology, the promise to fix things. Instead, I just said, I hope you figure it out, and hung up. I barely set my phone down before the next message came in. Daniel, a single text. You knew what was happening, and you let it explode. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He wasn't wrong, but that was the point. Without me to soak up all the tension, they were turning on each other. Every single thing they had buried over the years, every unresolved fight, every grudge they had ignored because they knew I would handle it. It all came pouring out. For once, they had to deal with their own mess. Later that afternoon, my sister sent a text. It wasn't angry. It wasn't guilt-tripping. It was short and to the point. I didn't realize how exhausting it was to do what you did. I thought you were just overreacting. I was wrong. That one. I actually answered. Yeah, a cousin, one of the few family members I actually got along with, sent an update. Apparently, Daniel's wife was livid. She had spent months planning the perfect wedding, only for it to be overshadowed by family drama. Word was, she had broken down crying that morning, telling Daniel she couldn't believe this is what she married into. Couldn't say I was surprised. Then came the text I wasn't expecting. My dad, a man who had stayed quiet through every family argument, who had let my mom run things, who had never once acknowledged what I did to keep the family from tearing itself apart. I get it now. That was all he said. I stared at the screen for a long moment before locking my phone. A couple of hours later, another call came in. Mom again, but this time her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. She had spent the entire day trying to put out the fires, trying to mend relationships, trying to get people to calm down, and for the first time, she couldn't do it. Her voice wavered. I don't know what to do. I let the silence stretch between us. Then, for the first time ever, I responded the way I should have all those years ago. That's not my problem. I hung up. Daniel and his wife cut their honeymoon short. Apparently, the stress was too much. Family members picked sides. Some claimed I was the villain, that I had turned my back on family when they needed me most. Others admitted, quietly, through private messages, that I had done the right thing, that I had deserved respect for what I had done over the years. It didn't matter. I was done. That night, I met up with the only cousin who had supported me from the start. He ordered drinks, smirked, and said, "You've done enough. Time to live for yourself." He wasn't wrong. I opened the family group chat one last time. No long speeches. No dramatic exits. I just hit leave group, silenced my phone, and for the first time in years, I was free. A month passed, no calls, no texts, no birthday reminders. Silence. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't checking my phone constantly, bracing myself for the next family emergency. I went about my days without interruption, no one dragging me into their fights, no one expecting me to clean up their mess. And the best part, the family hadn't magically learned to get along without me. If anything, things were worse. It started with my sister. She sent a single text. "This is exhausting." Apparently, without me around to smooth things over, the usual family drama hadn't stopped. It had only escalated. My sister had tried stepping in a few times, but instead of fixing things, she ended up getting dragged into the arguments herself. She was overwhelmed. I didn't respond. A week later, a cousin reached out. Daniel's marriage was already on the rocks. Lisa had seen glimpses of family drama before the wedding, but she hadn't lived in it. Now that she was part of it, she was seeing everything up close, and she hated it. The constant fighting, the unspoken grudges, the way minor disagreements spiraled into full-blown wars. She was already considering moving back with her parents. Not my problem. Then came Aunt Linda's meltdown. Linda was one of the biggest gossip stirrers in the family. She thrived on conflict, so long as it didn't directly involve her. She had relied on me to keep things from boiling over, so she could throw in her jabs and then sit back and watch. But now she had no buffer. A cousin told me she had called a family meeting to try and restore order. It went horribly. She ended up in the middle of an argument between two of my uncles, both of whom had never truly liked each other. Normally, I would have kept them from saying things they couldn't take back. This time, no one stopped them. They had a full-blown screaming match, dredging up every past insult and issue. By the end of it, they weren't speaking. For the first time ever, two family members had completely cut each other off. No cooling down period. No fake apologies for the sake of keeping the peace. Just done. Linda, frustrated and desperate, tried calling me. I ignored it. Then my mother started up again. "You're the glue that holds this family together." I let her message sit for a full day before responding. "Then maybe it's time the family falls apart." She didn't reply, but my dad did. He never got involved in these things. He had always let my mother handle the drama, watching from the sidelines like an exhausted referee. This time, though, he sent me a simple message. "Your mom is realizing how much she took you for granted. Didn't change anything." Meanwhile, some of my cousins, the same ones who used to joke about me always trying to fix things, were starting to realize just how much I had been fixing. One of them sent a message that was half apology, half admission. "We messed up." A few days later, an old high school friend, someone who had been at the wedding, sent me a text. "Dude, your family is insane. I don't know how you put up with that for so long." I didn't have an answer. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel reached out. It was short, simple. "I get it now. I wish I didn't, but I do." I read it twice. After weeks of no contact, after watching his wedding turn into a circus and his marriage start crumbling under the weight of our family's chaos, he finally understood. But understanding didn't change what had already happened. I replied once, "I accept your apology, but I'm not going back to being your cleanup crew." That was the end of that. Then I found out about the final betrayal. A cousin mentioned it in passing. My mom, desperate to restore the old order, had been telling the family I would eventually get over this, that I was just going through a phase, that I'd come back when I calmed down. It was a lie. A last-ditch attempt to rewrite my decision into something temporary. So I called her. She picked up immediately. I could hear the relief in her voice, like she thought I was finally coming back into the fold. I cut her off before she could say much. "I need you to hear me. I am not coming back to fix things." Silence. Then she broke down crying. But I knew better by now. The next day, she sent a long-winded email, detailing how the family was suffering and how I was being selfish. Then came the relatives, my aunt calling, my cousin texting, all feeding into the same narrative. She wasn't giving up easily. but I had already made my decision. I hung up. And then for the first time in my life, I blocked my mother's number. Just for now. Just long enough for her to understand I meant it. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I booked a solo trip. A cabin in the mountains. No cell service. No family drama. Just peace. For the first time in years, I was free. 6 months passed. 6 months of no contact. No phone calls. No texts. No last-minute interventions. I had held firm. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it was like to live without the weight of other people's problems pressing down on me. My days weren't spent dealing with other people's grudges. My nights weren't interrupted by urgent calls demanding I smooth over yet another fight. I had booked trips, started new hobbies, made new friends, went to therapy. And the biggest surprise, I didn't miss them. Not once, but the family. They were in free fall. A cousin, one of the few I still talked to, updated me one night over drinks. The once tight family was completely fractured. Some people weren't speaking at all. Others were grudgingly tolerating each other, but without a mediator. Every conversation was a potential landmine. The arguments never stopped. They just escalated. Daniel's situation was the worst. Lisa had officially filed for divorce. It wasn't even a quiet mutual decision. She had had enough. Enough of the constant drama. Enough of the never-ending family feuds. Enough of a husband who refused to set boundaries. She cited the toxic family dynamic as one of the primary reasons for leaving. Daniel was spiraling. He was trying to hold the family together himself, but he wasn't built for it. Without me, no one took him seriously as a mediator. Instead of calming things down, he became just another voice in the arguments, and it was eating him alive. Then my mom made one last attempt to drag me back in. She sent a long email, a novel, really. It was full of guilt-tripping, emotional manipulation, and carefully worded pleas about how the family needed me, how Daniel was struggling, how things weren't the same without me. I read the first few lines, then I deleted it. No response. My sister reached out next. But this time, it wasn't to beg me to come back. She told me she finally got it. She had tried playing the peacekeeper role, and it had chewed her up and spit her out. She realized how exhausting it was, how impossible it was, and for the first time she admitted, "I think you were right to leave." I appreciated her words, but I kept my boundaries firm. The family was finally seeing their chaos for what it was. For years, they had relied on me to keep things from blowing up. Now that they had to deal with the mess alone, they were realizing just how toxic it had always been. Then, through the grapevine, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. My dad, who had never spoken up, who had always let my mom run the show, had told relatives, "He's happier without us." He knew, and for once, he wasn't trying to pull me back in. Meanwhile, my life had never been better. Therapy had helped me unpack years of emotional exhaustion. Traveling gave me perspective. I built friendships with people who actually valued me, not just for what I could do for them, but for who I was. Then, out of nowhere, a message popped up from a number I hadn't seen in a long time. One of the biggest drama stirrers in the family. "I think we all owe you an apology." I didn't reply, because it wasn't about apologies anymore. Then, Daniel's situation went from bad to worse. His divorce was getting messy. He was overwhelmed, lost. For years, I had been the person guiding him, fixing things, making sure his life stayed on track. Without me, he had no idea how to function. And I realized something. I didn't feel satisfaction in his suffering. I just felt relief. I was finally free. Then came my mom's last desperate move. A healing family dinner. One last attempt to pull me back in. She begged me to come, said it would be a chance to reset, to bring the family back together. I didn't even reply, and I wasn't the only one. Another cousin, one who had watched everything unfold, quietly cut the family off too. They reached out and thanked me for showing them that leaving was an option. One by one, the old family dynamic was falling apart. No more fix-it Felix. No more mediator. No more me keeping them together. And they would never recover from it. That night, I sat on my balcony, sipping a drink, watching the city lights. For years, I had convinced myself that if I didn't fix things, everything would fall apart. And I had been right. But that wasn't my burden anymore. I smiled to myself. Should have done this years ago. A year had passed since I walked away from my family's chaos. 12 months of peace. No more late-night calls. No more last-minute interventions. No more being the emotional dumping ground for people who didn't respect me. Life was good. I had built something outside of them. New friendships. New hobbies. I had traveled, worked on myself, and finally understood what it meant to live without the constant weight of their problems pressing down on me. Then, the call came. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Maybe it was a work-related call. Maybe it was spam. It wasn't. It was Daniel. His voice was different, weaker. Not the arrogant, carefree brother I remembered. The one who used to roll his eyes when I tried to keep things together. His wife had officially filed for divorce. She had taken most of the assets, moved back in with her parents, and cut off all contact. Daniel was struggling financially, and more importantly, he was alone. There was no one left to clean up his mess. No wife to stabilize him. No mother or father stepping in to help. So now, suddenly, he needed me. I barely had time to process before he dropped the inevitable line. I need you to fix this. I laughed, genuinely laughed. For the first time in years, he was saying the quiet part out loud. He didn't want me back in his life because he missed me. He wanted what I used to do for him. You're joking, right? I asked. Silence. Then the justification started. You used to care about this stuff. You're the only one who could make things better. I let him ramble, let him dig himself deeper into a hole he didn't even realize he was in. Then, when he finally stopped, I calmly reminded him, you made fun of me for that. Remember? More silence. Then came the guilt trip. I was heartless. I had abandoned him. I was watching him suffer and doing nothing to help. I waited until he was finished. Then I asked, what exactly do you want me to do? He stammered. No real answer, no plan, just desperation. A cousin later filled me in on the rest. The family wasn't rushing to help him either. Mom had tried in the beginning, but even she was tired. Dad barely acknowledged his situation. The aunts had their own problems. No one was bending over backward for him. For once, he was the one struggling alone. That's when he really started scrambling. He tried flipping the script, claimed he was never part of the group chat that mocked me, that he never actually said anything bad about me. I let out a short laugh. So you just let them mock me? That's almost worse. More silence. Then, a weak, forced, barely there. I'm sorry. Okay? I didn't react. Because I knew what this was. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't genuine. It was survival. He wasn't sorry for what happened. He was sorry he had no one left to fix his life. I gave him a final truth bomb. You don't miss me. You miss what I did for you. The weight of those words sank in. I could feel it through the phone, but instead of admitting it, he lashed out, cursed at me, called me selfish. I didn't argue. I simply said, good luck figuring this out without me, and hung up. Minutes later, another message came in. Mom, can you please just hear him out? I didn't respond. Later that day, I told a close friend about the call, someone who had seen my family's dysfunction up close. He shook his head and said, he doesn't want a brother. He wants an emotional ATM. He was right. I blocked Daniel, not just his number, every possible way he could contact me. Social media, email, everything. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilt. No sadness, no second guessing, no lingering urge to fix things one last time, just relief. It didn't take long for my family to realize just how much they had relied on me. I heard through the grapevine that my mom had organized a family healing session, basically, an intervention. Except, instead of trying to convince me to come back, they were trying to fix themselves, without the one person who actually knew how to keep things from falling apart. A cousin filled me in. Mom had framed it as a fresh start for the family, a chance to reconnect, heal, and move forward. I almost laughed. I already knew exactly how this was going to go. These people didn't talk to each other. They yelled. They held grudges like trophies. They never actually worked through their issues. They just buried them, and waited for the next explosion. And without me there to steer the ship, the iceberg was inevitable. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes before everything imploded. I watched the family group chat light up in real time. Someone stormed out. An uncle brought up a 20-year-old debt and started yelling about leeches in the family. Mom cried dramatically, begging everyone to just get along. Then, mid-chaos, I got a text from a cousin who had always been more of a spectator in the madness. Dude, this is insane. You would have loved watching this. I smiled, because for once it wasn't my problem. With no one there to redirect the anger, they started turning on each other. Every buried grudge came spilling out. Every passive-aggressive comment from years past was suddenly back on the table. And right in the middle of it, Daniel, desperately trying to be the peacemaker. The same brother who used to mock me for taking things too seriously. The same brother who had laughed while my family used me as their personal fixer. Now, he was the one trying to smooth things over. And he sucked at it. No one respected him. No one listened. He had never been the problem solver. He had never been the one people turned to. Now, without me, he tried to step into my role. I saw him attempt to calm down a fight, only to get steamrolled by our uncles. I heard about him trying to mediate between my mom and my aunt, only to end up caught in the crossfire himself. It wasn't just that he didn't know what to do, it was that no one respected him in that role. Then, the inevitable happened. Mom tried to drag me back in. A desperate text. Look at what's happening. You need to come back. I replied with 2 words. No, I don't. That was the moment she finally realized. I wasn't coming back. Minutes later, another text came in, this time from my dad, a man who had stayed quiet through every family fight, who had always let my mom handle things. You did the smart thing by leaving. They're exhausting. I stared at my screen for a second. I had never expected him to admit it. The family meeting ended in complete failure. Some family members cut contact with each other entirely. A few still tried to act like everything was fine, but the damage was done. The group chat, which had once been a non-stop stream of gossip, drama, and passive-aggressive digs, had become a graveyard. No one had the energy for it anymore. And then came the public guilt trip. One of my aunts, the same one who had been one of the worst offenders in the Fix It Felix group chat, posted a long dramatic rant on Facebook about family abandoning each other. I almost choked on my coffee. The hypocrisy was astounding. Daniel's fall from grace was complete. His divorce was finalized. At first, Mom welcomed him back, telling everyone he just needed time to get back on his feet. But time passed and Daniel didn't change. He complained but never took action. He made excuses but never found solutions. Slowly, even Mom started pulling away, her patience wearing thin. By the time she stopped answering his late-night calls, it was clear Daniel was on his own now. He had gone from golden child to burden. Then, my sister called, and for the first time she wasn't trying to pull me back in. She was exhausted. She had been watching everything crumble and realized that it wasn't just about me, it was about the entire family dynamic being broken beyond repair. She admitted, "I think I need a break from them too." I gave her the same advice I had given myself a year ago. Then do it. Meanwhile, Daniel made one last desperate attempt to guilt the family. He gave a dramatic speech about how alone he felt and how nobody cared about him. But this time, no one bought it. Mom was drained. Dad was indifferent. The family was done cleaning up his mess. The group chat, once full of chaos, was eerily quiet. They had burned themselves out, and as I watched everything unfold from the outside, I felt absolutely nothing. For years I had feared what would happen if I walked away. Now, seeing the mess they had created for themselves, I realized something. I should have done this sooner. The wedding invitation arrived in the mail. A cousin I barely spoke to anymore was getting married. The envelope was thick, the kind meant to impress. Formal calligraphy, gold trim. I didn't even think about going. The moment it landed in my hands, I tossed it in the trash. Minutes later, my phone lit up with an expected message from my mom. "This is your chance to make amends." I replied without hesitation. "I have nothing to fix." And that was that. Meanwhile, at first Daniel was still the golden child. Our parents made excuses for him, comforting him after the wedding disaster and helping him financially. But as the months dragged on, things changed. His complaints became endless. His problems a cycle with no solution. Slowly, even our mom started losing patience, shifting from "he's going through a rough time" to "he needs to take responsibility for his own mess." That's when Daniel realized, without me to cushion his fall, he was hitting rock bottom hard. The golden child treatment had worn off. All that was left was a man who had never learned to stand on his own 2 feet. A cousin casually mentioned that Daniel had started complaining about how no one was helping him. No one cared. He had burned through their sympathy the same way he had burned through his marriage. Not my problem. Then, the unexpected happened. My sister left too. After months of watching everything crumble, she had reached her limit. She wasn't built for the emotional weight they dumped on her. She had tried to make things work, but just like I had warned, there was nothing to fix. She packed up and moved to another state, putting distance between herself and the madness. She sent me a message after she left. "You were right. I needed to get out." I welcomed her to freedom. Then, the family hosted a big event, an anniversary party for my parents. The kind that used to be treated as a mandatory attendance event. I ignored it, didn't acknowledge the invitation, didn't ask how it went, didn't care. And right on cue, Mom sent another emotional message. "I don't even recognize you anymore." I responded with the truth. "That's because I'm finally happy." She didn't reply. Dad, on the other hand, stayed silent. He never tried to force me back in, never pushed me to return. He knew better now. Then, I got another update from a cousin. Daniel had become the new Fix-It Felix. Without me there, he had been forced into the role. The same role he used to mock me for. The same role he had once laughed at. And he was failing miserably. No one took him seriously. He had spent years avoiding responsibility. Now he was drowning in it. I laughed when I heard, "Good luck with that." The family's reputation was collapsing. Relatives outside our immediate family were starting to distance themselves. The chaos, the toxic patterns, people were tired of it. No one wanted to be around that much dysfunction. Then, Aunt Linda, the same aunt who had mocked me for years, finally got her karma. People were avoiding her. The same people who used to egg her on were suddenly too busy for her calls. She had spent years stirring the pot, causing drama and getting away with it. Now, she was isolated. The group chat, the place where all of this chaos thrived, was officially dead. Weeks passed without a single message. Then months. The once non-stop flood of gossip, drama, and backstabbing had turned into a ghost town. It was over. I took a job offer in another city, packed up, moved thousands of miles away from the last physical thread connecting me to them. A fresh start. No more last-minute interventions. No more obligations. Just peace. Then, one last message came through. "Daniel, are you really never coming back?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I had already made my decision a long time ago. And for the first time in my life, I was completely free. No regrets. No second thoughts, just peace.